Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ted. This is the Business of Cyber Show. We're almost at episode number 40. I'm joined by Trish McGill, cybersecurity extraordinaire and friend and colleague from the EU. Trish, how are you today? Nice to talk to you. Thanks for making the time.
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, let's jump right in. NIS2, it goes live in October. Huge document, huge directive, a lot of challenges right now that major organizations are facing in Europe. Wanted to bring you on as you're navigating this front and center, working with CISOs, working with OT directors. And there's really four things that we wanted to cover today. And as we look at kind of the key objectives of NIS2, what do you think folks should be thinking about right now as it relates to the real directive that they're trying to achieve, and how do member states really manage that right now?
Yeah, so I think it's very important to understand what the intent is of the new NIS2 directive. And some of the key objectives are, one of the most important one that I see is the objective is to strengthen the cybersecurity measures through proper risk management. And the risk management standpoint, how we're supposed to be looking at it within this NIS2 directive, is no longer what is the risk management for the organization itself, how do you manage your risk, but what is the impact for society, human and environmental. So risk management is one of the key objectives. And that, of course, is in line also with enhanced incident reporting, if there are any cyber situations. And one of the most important things we also have to understand that NIS2 as an objective had for the EU member states to start cooperating, to working together, so that if there is an impact, we can join forces and actually barricade it before it gets too bad. So those are some of the intentions and key objectives of NIS2.
Well, I like that you bring up risk management. Risk management is it's a very large, loaded series of words, right? Risk management within cyber, risk management within risk itself. These are things that I think the nation states are going through, the member states are going to have to manage. What I found really interesting in this version of NIS is that the member states actually have to develop their own strategy, their own framework. They have to develop their own CSIRTs, incident response teams, essentially. There's a lot of guidance from NIS2 on what the member states have to do. Do you think that the individual member states get to define risk management strategies in their own words, in their own ways, or is NIS2 pretty prescriptive in what that should look like for those member states?
So they give you some examples, what you can use, the common frameworks that are known for risk management. They don't really tell you what to do and how to do it, but they just tell you have to have proper risk management. So if you can show that you've done everything in your power and that you've properly managed the risk, and there's still a cyber incident that has a huge impact on the environment, but you have shown that you've really managed your risk properly and thoroughly, then you've pretty much complied with what you're supposed to do. I think the most important thing is that organizations need to understand it's no longer the impact to the company, but it's the impact to human society, because that's what NIS2 directive is wanting to protect.
Yeah, and I think that, I think it's all encompassing, right? So they defined extremely effectively the who. I think they defined very extremely the why, but I also think they defined the what. Not so much at the granularity of the controls, but more so the strategic guidance and intent.
Yes.
As a former auditor, the thing that I always look for wasn't always the specific control and whether or not it was in place. It was more so, how is the organization viewing the standard or the framework or the rule? And do they understand, well, if I don't have that particular component in place, or if I don't have that specific control in place or procedure in place, here's what we are doing instead. I do think that this is an extremely auditable standard and directive that you could actually, there's enough meat on the bone where you could actually walk into an organization and answer the question, is the spirit of NIS2 incorporated into this organization or not? Your thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. Because what I see right now, if you talk to people, there are two different flavors. There's one subset of groups that say, oh, NIS2 is just like everything else. It'll be fine. We're not worried about it. And under the hood, it is cybersecurity controls, but the thought process this time is different. And then there's the other group that is absolutely panicking. And usually what you see is then that's the group of organizations that probably have a maturity level of 0 to 1. So this is a huge change for their organization. And then I see it's difficult for organizations. Yeah, where do we start? We don't know. What do they mean with risk management? What is business continuity? How do you define that? So definitely auditable very easily. But I do think that organizations need more guidance in the first part.
Yeah,
Two
I
reasons:
thought,
not to do too much because you don't want to go over the top, but also not to do the wrong things.
right. So what I thought was interesting is how well defined in, I think, what is chapter 3, just to lay out this too, is this cooperation group. It says biannually, biannual work program, representatives of the member states, so pretty much every country, the Commission, and NISA. Tell us what NISA is. I'm hoping I'm saying that correct. A lot of people in the EU reach out to that organization for guidance. How do you think that, what does that organization do specifically? And how can folks benefit or call on that group to help with NIS2 implementation?
Yes, I can tell you what I do, Ted. If I have a question and I'm not sure how to do specific things within this two directive, I go to ENISA. And I think that's the platform that we need to use. They are there to help us. They're not just here to tell us what we need to do, but they're there for our education, for awareness. They want to help us also what legal frameworks are impacted with this, how the laws will work. They are functioning as a collaboration platform. They also help us with incident reporting mechanisms, how we could do certain things. So for me, it's definitely use that because that's what it's there for.
Yeah, it's interesting because what I find, I wouldn't say unique, but I would say very interesting, is how well defined NIS2 supports the co-working groups, the data sharing, the CSERTs development. I mean, there are pages and pages and pages. There's entire chapters dedicated to how member states are going to organize at the national level, how they should, and then how they're all going to work at the European Union level. It'll be interesting to see that teamwork. Are those functions well established right now in Europe already, or is this a new addition that needs to happen? And your thoughts generally on data sharing across the member states and across sectors, right?
Yeah, so that's a great question because collaboration is one of the key components for NIS2. And although in our own environment, we do that a lot, we know how to find each other. We go to forums, we talk to each other, we go to keynotes, we learn, but it's not mandated. NIS2 is telling you from now on, everybody has to play nice and work together, share knowledge, share your findings, report incidents so everybody can learn from it, because the domino impact, if something happens in the EU, will be minimized. And that's what the intention is. If you look at the map of Europe and then the EU member states, you have to look at NIS2. It's really much to protect Europe. It's no longer just to protect one organization or one company. No, it's to protect Europe. So the collaboration part is key. And NIS2 will enforce that too.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So when we take a look at the one question that I have is, in the United States, we've got 16 critical sectors. There's arguments that there's more than that. But even individual sectors have their own working groups. They have their own data sharing models. They have their own ways of enforcing a given standard or governance program. What I see from this side of the water is that NIS2 is far more encompassing across all the sectors, recognizing that we're all going to work together. We're all going to share data together. The nations, the member states are going to create their own CSIRTs. They're going to create their own standards. But we don't see it individualized by sector. Is that true? Or do we also see in Europe that some sectors are standing up and saying, hey, we appreciate what NIS2 is going to do, but we're going to do something else too? I'm trying to understand the effect on the sectors themselves.
Yeah, so a good point, because when you look at NIS and NIS2, we went from 7 to 18 critical sectors. So that's quite a jump. Yeah, definitely. So what the intention is, of course, for every EU member state to have their own law. And then on top of that, there should be in place sector-specific guidelines. That's what the intention is, to translate the NIS2 requirements into practical steps per sector. So the guidelines, and I know some, like from the water authorities, for instance, in the Netherlands, we have guidelines in place, not fully mapped yet to NIS2, not yet, but those guidelines are supposed to help with practical things to do for the water authorities. And then if you were to turn it over, you can be mapped into NIS2. So they're not there yet, not for all critical infrastructure areas, but that is the intention. That's also what NIS2 wants us to do.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense. You know, in the US, there's some profiles that were developed and matched to NIS CSF, but they didn't really get tons of traction. There was a manufacturing one. I've spoken at length on the value of what that profile did. What it did is it mapped out the business outcomes specific to a sector. The business outcomes for a manufacturing facility are a little bit different than a water treatment facility.
Definitely.
Very much different than a utility. But I do think that you're accurate that applying a holistic governance or risk management framework at the sector level with sector specific business outcomes or risks or threats or controls, yeah, I think it's a little bit more mature. So maybe NIS2, V2, V3, as we move on in a couple of years, it might do that. Very, very good. Well, when you think about the member states, I want to talk real quick about what we talked about at the pre-show, is that NIS2 tells the member states they have to create their own entire national strategy, their own risk management strategy, their own framework, their own CSIRTs, their own program. I mean, they're basically saying, hey, countries, you're going to go and develop under our guidance an entire cyber risk management strategy, and it's your responsibility to get it done. How are the member states handling that and approaching that, to the best of your knowledge right now?
Yeah, so of course we try to keep track of what member states are where. You know, if you compare maturity level like 1 to 4, that would be a good baseline to look at it. There are, for instance, Belgium, Croatia, and Hungary already has the law in place. Not the sector-specific guidelines, but the law is in place. So that's a subset, just a few countries. But when you look at the bulk of the countries, they have started writing the legislation, but it is so cumbersome. It's so difficult to pinpoint what can be legally held liable for the organization and what you can't, because it's not a matter of just writing a law and says this is now the NIS2 directive for the Netherlands. You have to be able to map that to existing laws and not contradict those. And what can you enforce from criminal sanctions, because they're also possible, and what can you not? So the bulk is struggling, and then there's a tiny subset of countries that haven't really started too much yet.
Right. And how do you, okay, so you work with a lot of different colleagues, a lot of different sectors. So if I'm a food manufacturer in Germany, or my buddy is an auto manufacturer or a service provider in Italy, do you find that the asset owners are waiting on their member state governments to provide guidance, or are they just kind of moving forward and say, hey, we understand the spirit of NIS2, we're going to get these these controls in place or these articles? What are you finding mostly? Is everybody kind of waiting country by country to see what happens? Or is it like the rest of the world, which is, you know, governance or compliance standard separate? Asset owners move at the pace that the leadership wants them to move, at the pace that their resources are allocated. What are you finding out there?
So far, I have found, again, two different flavors. One flavor says, fine, I'm just going to go do it. I know what cybersecurity is. I will go ahead and take care of it, and I will be ahead of the game because the clock is ticking. And then there, if you look at some of the countries that haven't even started yet, they are more the countries that are waiting until the legislation comes and they are mandated to do something because they still have time then to become compliant. Luckily, the majority, I would say at least 70% is in a alerting mode that we need to hurry up and we need to do something. And you know what, Ted, specifically is the accountability, because NIS2 directive specifically states the accountability of top management, which I think is very helpful in implementing proper cybersecurity for critical infrastructure.
I'm going to actually read out the first two paragraphs of Article 21, and I'm going to follow it up with a question because I think it is so important to get your input here. This is the cybersecurity risk management measures section, and it says member states shall ensure that essential and important entities take appropriate and proportionate technical, operational, and organizational measures to manage the risk posed to the different systems, right? Taking into account the state-of-the-art and, where applicable, European and international standards, as well as the cost of implementation, the measures referred to in the first paragraph, which is what I just read, shall ensure a level of security and network information systems appropriate to the risk posed. In other words, this is how I read that. The member states have to take a level of resources that they think are appropriate to manage and mitigate the risks that are ultra evolving, and that you're going to be responsible for that. Or in other words, spend the resources you think are necessary to protect yourself. How do you read that, Trish? And how do you think that the member states are going to be receiving that? If you're at the board of directors, you're a CFO, you're a CISO, how do you interpret that?
So, Ted, you and I both know when you say risk management, it can be very complex. It's difficult. What is risk management? For you, it's something different than for me. For a hospital, the risk management is something totally different than for an industry that is making potatoes or French fries, you know? So
Yes.
I think the most important thing is for us, and that is our job, is to help navigate risk management per se in an organization. Like, what does this mean? And do we need those resources? Do we need these solutions? Do we need to make big changes or not? Maybe we're already doing a lot, but you have to first understand what the risk is for yourself. And I see still that there's too many businesses really having a hard time understanding risk management. And
yeah,
go ahead.
I think that if I'm looking at Article 21 and it says take appropriate and proportionate technical, operational, and organizational measures to manage the risk posed by the security in which those operations, I mean, it gets confusing if you read it too long. I think this ties back to the major talking point that is going through our industry right now, which is we don't have endless amounts of money, time, or people. And a lot of folks are just buying the most expensive vulnerability or detection or asset inventory solutions, just putting them in place. Is that a risk management strategy? I think the answer is no. And I think NIS2 tells you in the first paragraph of the article that has, I mean, the next section lays out all the different control families that you've got to have in place, that you're going to get audited on, that you've got to be able to comply with. It tells you in the first paragraph, it's your decision to make a call on how much resources you're going to put in place. And I think this is an opportunity. I think NIS has laid down a very simple yet challenging statement, which is you have to first be great risk managers, and then you're going to go and deploy whatever resources you think are fair. And by the way, we're not going to audit you just on the controls. We're going to come and audit you on how effectively you put those controls in place, and you're thinking of why. Does that make sense? Am I wrong for saying that?
No,
that's what, if I'm a CISO, that's the way I'm reading this.
What exactly, and especially why. You just said it, right? Say, for instance, you have a very good security operations center and you monitor and you've been breached, but you can show that you're up and running, you have a good SOC, you are patched as good as you can, but you probably don't have 300 people sitting in your SOC staring at the screen all day because you don't have those resources, but you've put everything in place that you can. You've successfully manage the risk for your organization and balance it versus cost and resources. So you can effectively show that you have done everything possible. And okay, you've still been breached. We never said it's impossible. We never said you will never get breached, but you can show you've done everything possible. It's like when you're driving a car and you get into an accident. But if I can show I hit the brakes, I looked in the mirror, I did everything possible, and I still got into an accident, at least I've managed the risk. So again, like I said at the beginning of our session, risk management is really number one when you look at NIS directive.
Right. Yeah, I tend to agree. Well, as we come up on the final 5 minutes, I wanted to pass it back to you. What would you offer to asset owners, risk managers, service providers out there as it relates to NIS2 from what you're seeing?
What I would offer to them?
What's that?
I didn't hear you.
Oh, no, my question was, I wanted to open it up to you in the last 5 minutes of the show. What would you tell a fellow asset owner or risk manager right now as he or she is kind of attacking this NIS2 directive at their facilities? What guidance would you offer?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Number one, I would say please talk to each other and work together. Have some forums, start to reach out to people and just say, hey, how are you doing this? That's number one. Number two, basic security hygiene. Have at least that in place. Go and check and see if you have your basic security hygiene. Take a good look at your risk management methodology. How are you doing this? And how is it working ongoingly? So not just one time, but how do you continuously manage your risk? And then the kicker part is, what do you do when business is down? Will you be able to function? Can you get back up and running? And how quickly can you do that? Or have you even tested it? I think the disaster recovery component is also surfacing in the NIS2 directive. Yeah. So basically it's first to ask a few questions to see where are we, what are you doing? And then we can dive into NIS2.
Makes sense. I think that like most compliance efforts, if you focus on resiliency based on really great mature processes, and you kind of bite the apple one bite at a time, the compliance takes care of itself. And I think that the NIS2 does a great job in Article 21 of laying out, hey, A through J, here are the control families we want you to focus on. We want you to focus on a risk management strategy. I mean, it's pretty simple. I think that it's going to be interesting to see how well enforced NIS2 is come October. Because if we can look back to any of the things that the United States has done, there's still a lot of question marks, even a year after implementation of some of these new governance and some of these new reporting requirements. People are still watching to see who gets fined first and who gets hit first. And it doesn't happen overnight. No,
it can't. It was the same with GDPR and other laws. You can't be compliant from day one.
Yeah.
And definitely show that you're making progress.
Yeah, no, progress is good. And in the world of security, it's like, you never really get ahead. You just don't get too far behind. Um, I see a couple different areas that I thought NIS2 focused. It focused really big on the risk management conversation. I think it focused really big on sharing of information, sharing of threats and vulnerabilities, utilization of these incident, response teams, these CSIRTs. And then the third piece was this theory of supply chain and how much the NIS2 drives evaluation of your supply chain. Anything else that you saw that stuck out really big in this version, and what folks might have a challenge implementing?
Yeah, disaster recovery. Definitely, disaster recovery, business continuity. It's actually it's very common, but at least do a test it, have some lessons learned, know what to do, start somewhere, look at your crown jewels, the heartbeat of your company, and it's. I think everybody should understand that one day everybody will have a breach, and at least know what to do so you can be back up and running swiftly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, Trish, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for your guidance. It's not the last time that we're going to talk about NIS2, and I look forward to seeing how over the course of the next couple of months these asset owners really reach out, share information, and deploy their resources to get their organizations ready for this compliance mandate.
Definitely. Thank you for having me, and good luck with everything.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Business of Cyber Show. I've been joined by Trish McGill talking about NIS2. Join us next week for another iteration on how to best manage your limited resources of people, time, and money. Stay tuned.